For more on the efforts to end the fighting in Ukraine, I'm joined by Anton Fedyashin. He is the executive director at American University's Initiative for Russian Culture. He also teaches Russian, Soviet, and European history. What do you make of this? We heard that Putin kind of sent out his own blueprint, then this response. We have these two European leaders meeting with him in the Kremlin. What do you make of all of this?
Well, one, it shows that Russia is not isolated because we see European leaders traveling to the Kremlin. Number two, I think it shows that there is genuine concern in Europe about the prospect of weapons being supplied to the Ukrainian army. And that concern grows out of two specific issues. One of them is that these weapons will probably end up in the hands of the rebels because they seize most of the weapons that the Ukrainian army uses against them, as we've seen over the past months. And number two, there is a strong belief in Europe that the Ukrainian army simply cannot manage the fight. We know that the mobilization, the last wave, has imploded, and that the Ukrainian army is not actually raising the numbers it's been trying to raise. So this is very bad news from the Europeans' point of view. And before Merkel comes here to Washington on Monday, she wants to bring something that she can negotiate over with the U.S. president.
There's also a third piece to this that some people are at least sending out there, which is this thing could widen, and a lot of European leaders very concerned about that as well.
Well, absolutely, because keep in mind that Europe has not fully emerged from its financial crisis, unlike the United States, which has bounced back. And so instability in Europe is very bad news for the whole continent, which has its own problems in Greece and Spain and Italy. And the slowdown in the Russian economy is affecting all of the other economies because Russia has become very integrated with the West. And so all of this, all the instability in the East is very bad news for the Russians, but also for the Europeans, and most of all, of course, for the Ukrainians.
Ukrainian government says we want this. Obviously, Putin wants something else. How do you get these two sides to kind of dovetail with one another, given the fact that there was this agreement in Minsk and it just never really seemed to materialize?
They'll have to go back to the negotiating table and start all over again, and this time hopefully bring in outside parties that can monitor very carefully the conditions as they are carried out on the ground. The Russians have already suggested perhaps UN peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. We'll see if the UN Security Council agrees to this, if this becomes part of the arrangement. But we don't know yet because no details have been released.
What do you think an agreement might look like? Given the fact that there have been these advances on the rebel side, you're talking about the implosion of the government side. Obviously, they would want certain things that perhaps they may not have wanted 6-7 months ago.
Well, absolutely. I think the biggest sticking point will be territory. How much territory is given autonomy exactly by the government in Kiev? That will be the biggest sticking point because Poroshenko, the current president of Ukraine, is very worried about going down as a man who lost parts of Ukraine. The upside of this is that the Russians do not want any more Ukrainian territory. They want Ukraine to remain a sovereign state, but they want increased autonomy, economic, cultural, political, for the two easternmost regions. So now fancy diplomatic footwork is going to have to be done.
What about sanctions? Have they played any role in this?
Well, so far, absolutely not. It's the Europeans that have come to Moscow, not Moscow that went to the European capitals. I mean, this is absolutely clear. The sanctions have had the exact opposite effect. I'm tired of saying this for months now, of what was intended. They have increased Putin's popularity at home. They have consolidated support for him among the population and among the elite. And the Russians are blaming a lot of the economic problems that have been building up before the sanctions on those sanctions now. And so they have so far played into Putin's hands almost entirely.
Anton, always a pleasure having you on the broadcast. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.